Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Payton Little, and I will be talking to you today about an integral aspect of our lives, death, and the end-of-life care that typically surrounds death. Every year, 5 million Americans are admitted to the intensive care unit, or the ICU as it's better known. If this statistic alone is not enough to surprise you, then this next one definitely should. 1 in every 3 elderly individuals are admitted to the ICU in the last month of their life. This means that for many individuals who should be receiving care prioritizing comfort, they're instead receiving invasive procedures, causing pain and discomfort in the final days or weeks of their lives. On top of this, the number of individuals receiving care within the ICU in the last 30 days of their life has actually increased by 5% from 2009 to 2015. The primary reason for this increase of ICU patients in the late stages of their lives can be traced back to a misunderstanding of false positive prognosis by loved ones. By expecting higher rates of recovery due to invasive treatments in later stages of life, loved ones are delaying elderly individuals' palliative end-of-life care for treatments that may have a null effect, all while making dying individuals less comfortable. Considering that all of us in this Zoom call will die eventually, it is beyond important to understand how our language and understanding of health impacts the care you receive. This is where our research comes into the fold. For the past 8 weeks, myself and other researchers have been analyzing how medical staff linguistics impact understanding of life expectancy for families and friends that have a loved one in an unconscious state within the ICU. Our population of study is for individuals who have been on life support for at least 10 days. Just to clarify, the average amount of time spent on life support is actually only 2 days. So 10 days is exceptionally above the average. We studied 38 interactions between medical staff and loved ones, all initially starting with a stated misunderstanding of prognostic life expectancy. Basically, family members and medical staff disagreed on the perceived mortality or recovery rate of a patient in the ICU. After a discussion of prognosis, only 14 of the 38 conversations, equating roughly 37%, understood next steps, declared understanding. However, we had a remaining 63% that did not understand the next steps or prognosis. The goal of our study is to compare those with understanding versus persistent misunderstanding to figure out what doctors are saying that leads to these different outcomes. We know that medical staff uses an array of verbal approaches to ensure that decision makers for unconscious or non-responsive patients on life support understand the probability of survival and realistic standards of recovery. For those unconscious in the ICU, these decision makers are referred to as surrogate decision makers. These approaches revolve around the decision maker's understanding of proposed prognosis. For those of you who don't know, a prognosis is the predicted health outcome typically presented by a medical professional to whoever is making healthcare decisions. Pictured on the screen now is a model of the qualitative codebook we created and utilized to analyze these interview transcripts. As you can see here from the reference column, we coded more than a couple instances of prognostic communication. Actually, around 1,450 instances of prognostic communication across the 38 transcripts. We utilized 25 individual codes, or nodes as we like to call them, to break down how end-of-life care was discussed by both surrogate decision makers as well as medical staff in the room. Using these nodes, we were able to note which forms of communication are utilized the most to analyze conversations surrounding prognosis and which forms of this communication are the most effective. These transcripts are real documentation of medical and decision maker interactions detailing the proposed recovery or death of a patient. By reading the transcripts for these recordings, myself and other researchers were able to assess which verbal approaches were utilized the most by medical staff to inform decision makers of the prognosis of their loved ones. On top of this, we were able to compare the utilization of these verbal approaches to the transcripts that demonstrate a shift from misunderstanding to understanding prior to and post-prognosis discussion. This is an example right here of the transcripts we analyzed as well as how they are coded. At this moment, we are still conducting our final level analysis, fingers crossed it goes well, by creating a statistical recount of which linguistic communication techniques lower misunderstanding. This step, although tedious, is the most important as it demonstrates which forms of communication actually impact how surrogate decision makers understand the recovery of quality of life and next steps for patients' healthcare journey. In conclusion, critical illness is very common and occurs regularly in the duration of late stages of life. We see that family members and surrogate decision makers are far too optimistic about prognosis and expected recovery, leading to admissions in the ICU instead of different care options. The end goal of our study is to identify the physician behaviors that lead to understanding of prognosis inform medical staff of these behaviors, and promote proper treatment options for the end-of-life care over current overutilized ICUs and invasive procedures. This will make any interaction that we or our loved ones have with medical staff more informative and more realistic. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm more than happy to answer questions.